It all began with a whisper that rippled through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. A whisper that would soon become a storm unlike anything the modern monarchy had ever faced. Just 6 minutes ago, a decree was quietly signed, and yet the implications were seismic. Imagine hearing that your family, your identity, your very place in the history of a centuries-old institution had been erased in a matter of hours. What would you feel? Anger, betrayal, disbelief, terror? All of these emotions swirled together as the news broke that King Charles had taken a decision that would leave the world stunned. Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and their children, Archie and Lilibet, had officially lost their royal titles. In an instant, everything changed. The atmosphere in the palace was tense, electric even, as aides scrambled to manage both the fallout and the optics. Staff who had spent decades serving the crown moved with cautious urgency. Whispers and furtive glances exchanged behind closed doors. Courtiers had been instructed to maintain composure, but the undercurrent of shock was palpable. The king himself had looked more somber than anyone had seen him in years, a shadow of internal conflict playing across his face. Some say his eyes betrayed a mix of sorrow and steely resolve, the look of a man who understands the magnitude of what he has just unleashed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why now? Why would King Charles make such a shocking decision at this very moment? The timing could not be more dramatic. Just days after the world had been captivated by Harry and Meghan's appearances at high-profile events across America, the royal family had moved swiftly, decisively, and quietly. It was a move that sent shockwaves not just through royal circles, but across the globe. Newsrooms scrambled to confirm facts, journalists dissected every possible angle, and social media lit up with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. Memes were already circulating, some humorous, many biting, capturing the public's raw reaction in real time. This is not just about titles. For those who see the monarchy as a symbol of tradition and stability, this moment threatens to shake the very foundations of that perception. To strip someone of a title is to strip them of privilege, protection, and identity. It is a declaration, a statement that the actions, behavior, or presence of these individuals are no longer aligned with the expectations of the institution they were once part of. For Harry and Meghan, this is more than symbolic. It is a public, irreversible marking of a rift that has been building for years. In the past, disagreements and family tensions might have been managed quietly behind palace walls, shielded from the public eye. But in the age of instant information, global media, and relentless social scrutiny, nothing stays secret for long. King Charles's decision has already sparked an immediate cascade of events. Lawyers are reportedly reviewing documents, PR teams are preparing statements, and insiders hint at private calls being made to mitigate the fallout. The story is moving faster than anyone could anticipate. And yet, for all the chaos, one question looms above all else. What led to this unprecedented action? Could it be the culmination of years of unresolved tension? Or is there something more immediate, more urgent, that forced the king's hand? Rumors abound, each more tantalizing than the last. Some suggest there were private discussions about the children's role in royal appearances, about legal threats, about financial entanglements that had reached a critical breaking point. Others whisper about secret letters, intercepted emails, and unreported incidents that may have finally tipped the scales. The truth, as always, is shrouded in layers, waiting for investigators, journalists, and the world to piece it together. Let's step back for a moment and consider what losing a title truly means. It is not merely a change of address or the removal of ceremonial privileges. It is the public erasure of a status that has been recognized for generations. For Archie and Lilibet, it changes the lens through which they are seen by the world. For Harry and Meghan, it marks a public censure that carries both social and financial weight. And for the monarchy, it is a declaration that tradition, loyalty, and behavior are non-negotiable. An assertion of authority in a time of rapid change and scrutiny. Meanwhile, the reactions inside the family have reportedly been intense. Sources close to the inner circle describe a mixture of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. Some family members are said to be quietly supportive of the king's decision, understanding the necessity of protecting the integrity of the institution. Others are reportedly struggling to reconcile their personal loyalties with the public actions being taken. The tension is palpable, and the private fallout is as dramatic, if not more so, than the public spectacle that is beginning to unfold. On the public stage, the response has been immediate and polarizing. Social media is aflame with speculation, outrage, and support, with millions of voices weighing in from around the globe. News outlets are broadcasting live updates, providing expert commentary, and dissecting every nuance of this monumental announcement. Memes, threads, and hot takes are circulating at a speed that even the palace communication teams struggle to keep up with. Every statement or lack thereof from Harry and Meghan is analyzed for hidden meaning. Every reaction from King Charles and other senior royals is scrutinized for emotion, intent, and political significance. Yet, despite all the speculation, one thing is certain. The full story is far from over. There are layers of intrigue, emotional conflict, and potential revelations still hidden behind palace walls. Letters, documents, and private conversations may soon come to light, and when they do, the narrative could shift dramatically. What has already been made public is only the first act in a drama that is unfolding in real time, and the stakes could not be higher. As viewers, we are left with a mix of curiosity, shock, and anticipation. What will Harry and Meghan do next? How will the children adapt to this sudden change? What are the implications for the monarchy's image and authority, both domestically and internationally? And perhaps most importantly, is there more to this story than we have yet seen? An untold chapter that will redefine everything we thought we knew? And so, as the palace gates close and whispers turn into plans, one thing is clear. History is being written at this very moment. The decisions made in these private chambers will echo through generations. The emotional impact on Harry, Meghan, and their children is only beginning to unfold. And the world waits, collectively holding its breath, for the next revelation, because what comes next could change everything. Begins with a question that no one in the royal circles could answer. How does a family recover when its very foundation has been shaken in front of the world? The announcement had barely left the palace gates, and already the shockwave was reverberating across continents. Editors in London, New York, Sydney, and Tokyo were scrambling to understand the scale of what had just happened. Headlines flashed, tweets multiplied, and hashtags climbed into the trending lists, each one more sensational than the last. Harry and Meghan stripped of titles, they read. Royal children lose status. The phrases were simple, but the consequences were anything but. Inside the palace, the mood was a mixture of disbelief and grim determination. Courtiers who had long prided themselves on discretion now moved with brisk efficiency, yet whispers of panic echoed through the ornate halls. Meetings were convened on the fly. Staff were briefed, then rebriefed. Security officers, never accustomed to uncertainty at this level, were instructed to maintain heightened alertness. Every camera, every microphone, every line of communication was suddenly under scrutiny. This was no ordinary announcement. It was a seismic event in the heart of the monarchy. Observers close to the family reported scenes of intense emotional tension. King Charles, usually composed in public, was reportedly restless behind closed doors. His aides describe him walking long corridors, pausing in silent contemplation, hands clasped tightly as though trying to grasp the immensity of what he had just decreed. Some said they had never seen him like this, not even during previous crises. The weight of centuries of royal tradition pressed on him, and yet, he had made a choice that would leave a permanent mark on his family and the institution itself. For Prince Harry, the news landed like a physical blow. Friends describe him pacing frantically, repeatedly calling Meghan to confirm whether the decree was real, whether it was official, whether there was a chance it could be reversed. His voice, usually calm and measured, was tense and urgent. The disbelief was not just about losing a title. It was about losing a place in a family he had once believed was unshakable, a family that had been both his anchor and his cage. For Meghan, the reaction was calculated but no less intense. Behind closed doors, She reportedly consulted legal advisors and communications experts, considering every possible angle: how to respond, how to protect their children, how to maintain public composure. The public reaction was instantaneous and brutal. Social media became a battlefield of speculation, opinion, and outrage. Some saw the king's action as necessary, a statement of discipline and duty, while others accused the monarchy of cruelty, of punishing a family that had dared to chart its own path. Memes spread at lightning speed, with captions mocking, dramatizing, or sympathizing with the disgraced royals. The emotional contrast between private despair and public spectacle was stark. And yet, there was an underlying question everyone was asking: what had triggered this? Some insiders suggest it had been brewing for years. The relationship between Harry and his father had long been strained, punctuated by public disagreements, private grievances, and the constant glare of the media. Meghan's entry into the family had intensified the scrutiny. Every word, every action, every decision was examined, criticized, and amplified. But was this just accumulated tension, or had something specific, something urgent, finally forced the king's hand? Whispers in the palace hinted at secret letters, private conversations that had been intercepted, and a series of small, but significant breaches of trust. One aide described discovering documents that raised questions about the handling of family communications, the integrity of public statements, and the way the children were being presented to the public. It wasn't just the titles that were at stake. It was the perception, the symbolism, and the authority of the crown itself. And then there were the courtiers, caught in the middle of a historic rift. Loyal staffers faced impossible choices: how to support the family they had served for decades while also upholding the king's decision. Some were quietly sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, believing the punishment harsh, disproportionate, or even unjust. Others accepted the decision as necessary, a reinforcement of the monarchy's authority. Tensions among staff reportedly reached unprecedented levels, with hushed arguments behind closed doors, conflicting loyalties, and subtle acts of defiance or compliance. The media scrutiny only magnified the stress. Journalists, some long familiar with royal protocol, now had to navigate the delicate line between public interest and sensationalism. Every photograph, every official statement, every interview opportunity became an arena for speculation. News anchors debated the decision endlessly, political commentators weighed in, and public opinion surveys began to show sharp divides. In a matter of minutes, a story that would have once taken days to reach global awareness had already saturated every major platform. Despite the chaos, some inside the palace moved to contain the situation. Confidential meetings were held to coordinate the family's next steps, draft potential statements, and anticipate the reactions of foreign dignitaries. The king's advisors emphasized the importance of presenting a united front, even as private emotions simmered beneath the surface. Every move was carefully orchestrated, yet the human element, the anger, the fear, the betrayal, remained impossible to control fully. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan's team scrambled to respond. Calls were made to lawyers, PR consultants, and trusted friends. Every action was weighed, every message considered for its potential to escalate or mitigate the crisis. The children, Archie and Lilibet, were shielded as best as possible. Yet even their routines were disrupted. Their world, once defined by school, friends, and family rituals, was suddenly framed by public speculation, media attention, and the uncertainty of what their new status would mean. This was more than a family dispute. It was a tectonic shift, a collision of tradition, duty, and personal identity. And as the initial shock began to settle into a simmering tension, the palace realized that the ramifications of this decision would continue to unfold for months, if not years. The first reactions were only the beginning. How would the public respond over time? How would allies and opponents within the family react? What secrets might yet emerge to further complicate the narrative? And the most pressing question of all: how would Harry, Meghan, and the children navigate a world where their identities had been publicly stripped? Would they fight back, seek reconciliation, or retreat entirely from public life? The answers were uncertain, and the suspense gripped everyone connected to the monarchy. But as the palace staff braced for the storm, one message arrived that no one expected. A communication, urgent and cryptic, from a source outside the immediate royal circle hinted at information that could shift everything. It was a note, brief but heavy with implication, suggesting that this was only the first act of a much larger drama. Something was coming, something that could change not just Harry and Meghan's fate, but the entire perception of the monarchy itself. And yet, before anyone could act, before statements could be prepared, before advisors could analyze the note, another shock arrived. A leak, just a single image, sent anonymously, appeared on social media. A glimpse of Harry, Meghan, and the children in a private moment, unaware of the storm now surrounding them. The public, already hungry for scandal, immediately speculated wildly. Every eye was now on the family. Every narrative was being rewritten in real time. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Royal watchers dissected the image for hidden meanings. Analysts debated what it revealed about the family dynamic. Social media users speculated about its authenticity. Some suggested it was staged. Others claimed it confirmed the worst fears. And amidst all the chaos, one thought dominated the palace. The situation was now completely out of control, and the consequences of the king's decision were about to accelerate faster than anyone could predict. How does a monarchy handle a crisis that strikes at the very heart of its authority? Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, decisions are made that the public rarely sees. But this time, every whisper, every hesitation, and every glance carried enormous weight. The moment Harry, Meghan, and their children lost their titles was more than just a headline. It was a test of loyalty, judgment, and survival for everyone inside the palace. The corridors were alive with quiet tension. Footsteps echoed differently that day. Conversations fell into urgent whispers, and doors closed with a sharper thud than usual. Staff who had once moved with seamless confidence now hesitated. Everyone understood that a single misstep could ripple outward, inflaming public speculation or, worse, undermining the king's authority. Courtiers moved in clusters, exchanging coded words, their expressions betraying a mix of awe, fear, and sympathy. A senior aide reportedly muttered that he had never seen such a delicate balancing act, noting that even small gestures, hand placements, slight nods, were scrutinized, memorized, and debated among staff. At the center of it all, King Charles faced the weight of a monumental decision. This was not the first time he had had to navigate family tension, but it was perhaps the most delicate. Every choice carried political, social, and emotional consequences. The king's advisors, legal counsel, and closest confidants were summoned to a secure chamber, where documents and messages were laid bare on a polished oak table. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken understanding. Whatever happened here would define the monarchy for years, perhaps decades. Meetings stretched for hours. The king listened to reports, considered legal opinions, and weighed the potential media fallout. There were debates, heated at times, about the best way to phrase communications to the public. Advisors argued over whether the announcement should be framed as a disciplinary measure, a protective act for the institution, or simply an administrative update. Every phrasing carried nuances. Every word could trigger unintended interpretations. In essence, the palace had become a war room of words, strategy, and emotion. And yet, the most dramatic moments often happened in silence. Observers reported that Charles would pause, gaze at an empty chair, and mutter reflections about duty, legacy, and personal regret. These moments, fleeting as they were, revealed the human side of monarchy. A man trapped between public expectation and private emotion. He understood that what he was doing was unprecedented in modern times. No king in recent memory had stripped an immediate family member of titles in such a direct and public manner. Every move required careful thought, yet urgency demanded action. Meanwhile, courtiers and staff wrestled with their own inner conflicts. Loyalty, after all, is rarely absolute. Some sympathized deeply with Harry and Meghan, seeing them as victims of institutional rigidity. Others felt compelled to back the king, believing the integrity of the monarchy must come first. In hushed tones, confidences were shared, opinions voiced, and alliances subtly formed or tested. One palace insider even admitted to feeling torn, acknowledging that while the king's decision might have been necessary, the human cost weighed heavily on those caught in the middle. Complicating matters were external communications. Letters, emails, and discreet phone calls began flooding into the palace from a range of sources. Former royal aides, political figures, international diplomats, and legal advisors. Each brought a piece of advice or insight, but often they conflicted with one another. Some urged restraint, warning that public anger could escalate into a media frenzy. Others advocated for transparency, arguing that honesty, even if painful, would preserve credibility. The king had to navigate these conflicting voices while managing his own emotional response, and he did so with a measured composure that belied the storm brewing inside. Adding to the pressure, social media had already begun circulating fragments of what would later become viral speculation. Images, rumors, and unverified claims started appearing, each one adding tension. Palace staff scrambled to contain leaks, yet the instantaneous nature of modern communication made control nearly impossible. The king's aides were forced into reactive management, assessing every post, every comment, and every report. Public perception was no longer a distant concern. It was immediate, relentless, and potentially explosive. It was during this tense period that another layer of complexity emerged. A confidential letter, reportedly written by a senior family member, was intercepted by palace security. The contents hinted at previously undisclosed grievances, including disagreements over public appearances, charitable initiatives, and even the handling of private family matters. This document, while small in size, carried enormous emotional weight. It suggested that the tensions leading to the stripping of titles were deeper and more complicated than anyone outside the palace could have imagined. For advisors, it presented a dilemma. Should they reveal its existence to the public or keep it confidential to protect the family's image? The king's decision-making process was not purely about emotion. It was also strategic. Each step had to consider the monarchy's legacy, the reaction of the Commonwealth, and the message sent to future generations. Advisors highlighted potential consequences, including international diplomatic tensions, media backlash, and the possible erosion of public support. They debated the risks of immediate disclosure versus a delayed, carefully controlled release. The pressure was immense, and yet Charles pressed forward, resolute in his decision. Simultaneously, Harry and Meghan's camp began to mobilize. Though thousands of miles away, they were fully aware of the palace's internal dynamics. Advisors advised them on messaging, public statements, and private communications with friends and allies. Every action, even the smallest social media post or Instagram story, was now under microscopic scrutiny. They faced the dual challenge of managing personal emotions while navigating the political and public ramifications of the king's decision. The king also had to consider the children, Archie and Lilibet, and how this decision would affect them. Beyond legal or ceremonial implications, there were emotional consequences. How would they perceive their place in the family? How would they reconcile the love they felt for their father and grandparents with the public reality that their status had been altered? Psychologists and child development experts were reportedly consulted in a rare move, offering guidance on how to cushion the immediate impact while preparing for long-term adaptation. Despite these careful considerations, mistakes and missteps were inevitable. Confidential conversations were overheard, notes misplaced, and internal disagreements leaked to close confidants. Every small error had the potential to magnify the unfolding drama, adding fuel to a fire that had already begun to burn. Even among trusted aides, speculation ran rampant. Was there a way to reverse the decision if needed? Could the public reaction force the monarchy to reconsider? Every possibility was weighed, yet the clock moved inexorably forward. And then came the subtle, almost imperceptible signals that hinted at larger forces at play. Anonymous communications, subtle warnings, and confidential reports suggested that not all parties outside the immediate family were neutral. Advisors speculated that media insiders, political actors, and international influencers might attempt to sway the narrative. This realization added a new dimension to the palace's already tense environment. They were no longer reacting only to internal family dynamics but to a complex, interconnected web of global scrutiny. Within this maelstrom, one quiet observation became increasingly apparent. The initial shock of the announcement was only the beginning. As courtiers, staff, and advisors worked to maintain composure and control, it became clear that more revelations were yet to surface. Secrets that might alter not only public perception but also the trajectory of the royal family itself. The king, despite his preparation and the council of experts, could not anticipate every ripple effect. And the family, removed from their titles and privileges, faced an uncertain future whose full contours were impossible to predict. As the day drew on, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Conversations slowed, footsteps softened, and a tense quiet filled the grand halls. Yet beneath that calm, the gears of strategy, emotion, and history were turning faster than ever. The king knew that his decision would be debated for decades, that it would be dissected in memoirs, analyzed in documentaries, and cited in countless discussions about the monarchy. And somewhere, in the midst of the palace's silence and urgency, a subtle, unspoken question hung in the air. Had the decision truly achieved its intended purpose, or had it set in motion forces that could not be contained? But just as advisors began to feel a semblance of control, a new revelation arrived. An internal report, marked confidential, suggesting that the consequences of this decision were far more immediate and potentially explosive than anyone had anticipated. A leak, a misstep, or perhaps even sabotage could ignite a public scandal, one that might redefine the monarchy forever. What happens when a lifetime of expectation, tradition, and identity is ripped away in an instant? For Prince Harry, the news that he, Meghan, and their children had been stripped of their titles hit like a physical blow. But this was no ordinary shock. It was a profound, personal upheaval, one that struck at the very core of who he believed he was. How does a man reconcile the public image of a royal with the private reality of a father and husband suddenly branded as a commoner by the world? Immediately after hearing the news, Harry reportedly paced the rooms of his home in California, the phone pressed tightly against his ear. Calls were made, messages sent, each one tinged with urgency, disbelief, and desperation. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried a sharp edge. Friends recall him repeating the same questions over and over. Is this real? Did they really do this? Can they take it back? Even for someone accustomed to the glare of public scrutiny, this was different. This was personal. This was betrayal in its rawest form. And yet, there was more than anger. There was grief. The sense of loss was layered and complex. Titles are not just symbolic. They represent security, identity, and belonging. For Harry, they were a connection to a family and an institution that had shaped his entire life. The abrupt removal of that connection sent him spiraling through a labyrinth of emotions. Confusion, sorrow, regret, and anger. He questioned not only the fairness of the decision but the motives behind it. Was this truly about protocol and duty, or something more personal, a culmination of long-standing tensions that had festered for years? Harry's friends describe a private struggle that mirrored the very public narrative unfolding in real time. He reached out to confidants, advisors, and even some family members in urgent late-night calls. Each conversation was a delicate dance. He wanted support, insight, and guidance, but he also had to navigate the treacherous waters of loyalty and discretion. Every word mattered. Every misstep could be misinterpreted or leaked, adding fuel to a fire that already threatened to consume him. But what complicated matters even further was Meghan. Unlike Harry, whose royal upbringing had accustomed him to structured protocol, Meghan had cultivated a life-balancing media savvy with personal ambition. Her reaction was strategic, measured, and intensely focused. Friends say she immediately began drafting a series of potential responses, considering everything from public statements to private letters, weighing the impact of every option. She was thinking not just of titles but of legacy, reputation, and the protection of their children. For the children, the impact was profound. Archie and Lilibet, though young, were not immune to the emotional reverberations. Sources close to the family suggest that Harry tried to shield them from the immediate media storm, but the news, like a shadow, crept into their lives anyway. Questions about school, public appearances, and identity loomed large. How do you explain to a child that their position, status, and recognition, things they had taken for granted, have suddenly been taken away? Harry faced this dilemma with a sense of urgency, balancing the need for emotional honesty with the instinct to protect his children from fear and confusion. The emotional strain did not exist in isolation. Harry's public persona, built over decades of media exposure, suddenly collided with private vulnerability. Every social media post, interview, or public appearance was now subject to intense scrutiny. Supporters rallied, critics jeered, and neutral observers speculated. Memes, hashtags, and news segments dissected every facial expression, every gesture, every word. The pressure to appear composed while grappling with the internal storm became almost unbearable. And yet, Harry's response was not purely reactive. He began to strategize. He considered legal recourse, public statements, and private discussions with international allies. He thought about memoirs, documentaries, and interviews, all channels through which he could shape the narrative and assert his perspective. Every choice carried weight. Every action had the potential to either escalate or defuse the situation. He had become a master of navigating public perception, and now that skill was being tested in unprecedented ways. Friends also note the profound sense of betrayal Harry felt toward his father. For years, there had been tension, disagreements, and unspoken resentments. Some of these had been made public. Others remained private, known only to the inner circle. Yet this action, stripping titles in a manner both immediate and irreversible, felt like the culmination of all those years of conflict. The emotional impact was heavy. For Harry, the decision was not just about protocol or status. It was deeply personal, and it struck at the very heart of his identity. At the same time, he grappled with conflicting loyalties. His sense of duty toward the monarchy, toward tradition, and toward his family collided with his role as a husband and father. The public narrative painted him one way, the private reality another. Harry's advisors warned that public statements or actions could be seized upon, distorted, or weaponized. Every communication had to be precise. Every move had to be calculated. Yet the emotional stakes made calculation difficult. How do you make strategic decisions when your heart is in turmoil? Meanwhile, Meghan's influence was both stabilizing and amplifying. While Harry processed grief and shock, Meghan focused on forward momentum. She encouraged measured responses, emphasized the importance of protecting the children, and analyzed media trends to anticipate next moves. Their partnership became a delicate dance, each supporting the other while managing the pressures of a suddenly unpredictable world. Even at a distance, their relationships with family members were tested. Calls to other royals were reportedly tense, formal, and laden with subtext. Every conversation carried unspoken expectations. Every silence spoke volumes. Harry had to navigate old wounds, fractured loyalties, and the unrelenting public eye. And amidst it all, he faced one immutable truth. The titles were gone, and with them, a part of his connection to the family he had once known. Amidst this emotional whirlwind, one critical factor emerged: the need to act. Friends note that Harry felt a mix of desperation and resolve. He could retreat quietly, allow events to unfold as they would. Or he could engage, assert his voice, and prepare for the inevitable scrutiny. His decisions in the immediate hours and days would define not only his own trajectory but the broader perception of the monarchy in this historic moment. And as Harry grappled with these internal battles, the outside world remained mercilessly attentive. Every speculation, every rumor, every report contributed to the pressure cooker atmosphere. The media, unrelenting, amplified both truth and conjecture. Public sentiment became a living entity, shifting with each new image, statement, or leaked document. Harry, caught between private turmoil and public expectation, understood that in this moment, perception could become reality. And yet, even with this intense scrutiny, the story was far from complete. Friends hint that Harry had discovered a communication, cryptic, urgent, and deeply troubling, that suggested there was more at play than a simple stripping of titles. It hinted at hidden motives, unseen pressures, and potential betrayals that would soon come to light. This revelation, still private, promised to change everything Harry thought he knew about the decision, his family, and the forces surrounding them. But before he could process this revelation, before plans could be formed or strategies implemented, another shock arrived. A private message from an unexpected source, one that could upend everything Harry believed about his position and future. What would you do if the world turned against you in an instant, if your identity, your privileges, and your perceived security were all stripped away in a matter of hours? For Meghan Markle, the news that she, Harry, and their children had lost their royal titles was not merely shocking. It was a challenge that demanded immediate, precise, and calculated action. While Harry grappled with grief, disbelief, and anger, Meghan's mind shifted quickly to strategy, foresight, and damage control. How do you respond to an unprecedented royal censure when the eyes of the world are upon you, every move scrutinized, every word dissected, and every emotion analyzed? The initial hours were a whirlwind. Meghan reportedly called advisors, lawyers, and PR strategists in rapid succession, seeking clarity on the legal and practical implications of the king's decision. Questions that had seemed abstract only hours before, inheritance rights, security measures, legal protections for the children, suddenly became urgent, actionable priorities. Every detail mattered, every potential misstep could be weaponized, and Meghan understood that a miscalculation could irreversibly damage both their reputation and the well-being of their children. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Meghan's thinking extended beyond the immediate fallout. She began drafting potential statements, anticipating questions from media outlets, and plotting a path that balanced transparency with discretion. Her goal was twofold: protect Harry and the children, and assert her own agency in a situation that could have easily rendered her powerless. Friends and advisors recall her moving with unusual intensity, a combination of urgency and calm precision, as if each decision were a chess move in a game with extremely high stakes. Yet even as she strategized, Meghan faced a deeply personal challenge. The stripping of titles was not only a public humiliation but also an emotional blow, signaling rejection by the very institution she had once married into. She had to reconcile feelings of anger, disappointment, and betrayal with the need to present herself as composed, resilient, and in control. Every private reflection had to be filtered through a lens of public perception. Every conversation was calculated. Even a fleeting expression of frustration could be magnified, spun, and shared globally. And then there were the children. Archie and Lilibet, though young, were acutely aware of the shifts in their world. Meghan reportedly spent long hours contemplating how to explain the situation to them, how to provide reassurance without sugarcoating the reality, and how to protect their sense of security in a suddenly destabilized environment. It was a delicate balance. She needed to shield them emotionally, provide clear guidance, and maintain the integrity of their family unit, all while the outside world watched, analyzed, and speculated. In parallel, Meghan considered the broader public narrative. She understood that perception could be as powerful as reality. Every post, statement, or interview could influence public opinion, shape media coverage, and even impact the monarchy itself. Her team analyzed trends, discussed timing, and crafted messages designed to mitigate backlash while asserting control over the evolving story. Meghan's approach combined pragmatism with media savvy, blending legal, emotional, and strategic considerations into a cohesive plan of action. Yet despite all this preparation, contradictions loomed. Meghan had to navigate conflicting advice from allies, legal counsel, and even friends within the extended royal circle. Some urged restraint, advocating a period of silence to allow tempers to cool. Others recommended immediate action, leveraging the media to clarify their position and assert independence. Every choice carried risk. Every step had potential consequences that could reverberate far beyond their personal lives. Even as she moved strategically, Meghan's emotional reality was complex. The stripping of titles was not just a procedural matter, it was a symbolic declaration of rejection. It touched on issues of identity, loyalty, and belonging. Friends describe moments of private reflection where Meghan confronted the depth of her loss, the sense of isolation, and the intensity of public scrutiny. These moments were brief, but they fueled her determination to act decisively, to assert control, and to protect her family. At the same time, Meghan's interactions with Harry became a crucible for their partnership. The two navigated a delicate dynamic. Harry's grief and outrage met with Meghan's measured, strategic thinking. Their conversations, often long and intense, revolved around immediate responses, long-term implications, and potential media engagements. Each discussion tested their ability to work together under extreme pressure, and each decision carried implications that could not be undone. The stakes extended beyond the family. Advisors warned that any misstep could provoke further scrutiny from the media, invite political commentary, and even influence public support for the monarchy. Meghan understood that her actions would be interpreted not only as personal reactions but as statements with national and international resonance. The pressure to perform flawlessly in this high-stakes environment was immense, yet Meghan navigated it with a blend of pragmatism, instinct, and calculated risk. And then came the subtle, almost invisible maneuvers, contacts with allies outside the immediate royal circle, communications with trusted advisors abroad, and even clandestine conversations with journalists. Each interaction was carefully managed, designed to shape narrative, gather intelligence, or anticipate future challenges. It was a sophisticated web of influence and strategy, demonstrating that Meghan was not merely reacting to events but actively seeking to shape them. Despite her focus, the emotional weight remained. Losing a title is not merely symbolic. It changes how one is seen by the world, how one is protected, and how one is treated. Friends note that Meghan oscillated between frustration, determination, and a keen awareness of the broader implications. She was determined not to be sidelined or defined solely by the king's decision. Her approach was calculated, precise, and, in many ways, revolutionary, leveraging every tool at her disposal to assert agency in a system that had sought to constrain her. And yet, for all her planning, Meghan knew that uncertainty remained. The palace's internal dynamics were shifting, leaks were inevitable, and unforeseen challenges could arise at any moment. The world was watching, waiting for the next development, and every action she took was a potential trigger for further escalation. It was a high-stakes game, and one misstep could have consequences far beyond the immediate family. But perhaps the most critical aspect of Meghan's response was her ability to anticipate the unexpected. Friends describe a moment where she paused, considered the possibilities, and made a decision that would reverberate through both the family and the media landscape. It was a decision designed to protect, to assert control, and to signal that she, too, was an active participant in this unfolding drama. And just as Meghan's strategy began to take shape, a new piece of information arrived. A private, urgent communication that hinted at undisclosed threats and potential betrayals. It suggested that the story was far from over, that unseen forces were at play, and that the next chapter would bring revelations no one had anticipated. Imagine being just a child and suddenly learning that the world you thought you knew, your identity, your place, your family's recognition is gone. For Archie and Lilibet, the announcement that their parents had been stripped of royal titles wasn't just news. It was a seismic shift in reality. Overnight, the labels, privileges, and security that had defined their existence became uncertain, leaving them caught between innocence and an adult conflict they could barely comprehend. How does a family protect children when their world has suddenly been fractured in public view? How do you shield them from scrutiny, speculation, and rumor while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy? The immediate impact on the children was profound. Sources close to the family reveal that Archie, only a young boy, struggled to understand why suddenly the adults around him seemed tense, why conversations hushed the moment he entered the room, and why the press had flooded every device with speculation about his future. For Lilibet, the shock was compounded by the absence of familiar routines, School schedules, playdates, and family gatherings all became tinged with uncertainty. The palace environment had always been structured and predictable. Now it was anything but. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware of this vulnerability. Reports suggest that Meghan immediately began restructuring the children's daily life, introducing measures to protect their emotional well-being while simultaneously addressing the public narrative. Private tutors were briefed on how to approach discussions about identity, and caregivers were instructed on careful language to help the children process the changes without panic. Yet, even with these precautions, the ripple effects were unavoidable. A casual conversation overheard by staff, a fleeting glance on social media, or an unsolicited question from a peer could unsettle the children in profound ways. The emotional stakes extended beyond immediate confusion. Experts consulted by the family reportedly warned that children in these situations could experience anxiety, identity confusion, and a sense of insecurity that might linger for years. Harry and Meghan were forced to confront not only the external consequences of the king's decision but the long-term psychological implications for their young children. Every decision, from media engagement to travel, was weighed against its potential impact on Archie and Lilibet's sense of stability and safety. And yet, there was a delicate balance between protection and transparency. The children could not be entirely shielded from reality. They observed their parents' emotional states, the tension in the household, and the flurry of activity surrounding the family. They sensed the gravity of the situation, even if they did not fully understand it. Meghan reportedly used careful storytelling to explain changes in titles and public attention, framing the events in terms that were age-appropriate while still conveying the seriousness of the situation. Harry reinforced these lessons, providing reassurance and modeling calm determination even in the face of shock and anger. Outside the home, the world was relentless. The media, never patient, began broadcasting images, speculating about reactions, and dissecting family interactions. Social media users, unaware of the children's direct experience, debated their status, speculated on their future, and at times, spread misinformation. Every image, every detail, every perceived gesture of Archie or Lilibet was interpreted through a public lens, threatening to undermine the parents' careful efforts to maintain normalcy. Harry and Meghan faced the daunting task of protecting their children's innocence while navigating a global audience intent on scrutinizing every detail. Reports from close aides suggest that Harry and Meghan were deliberate in their approach to controlling information. Photographs, videos, and appearances were tightly scheduled and monitored. Trusted staff members were given explicit instructions to minimize exposure, manage interactions, and maintain consistent messaging about the family's status. Yet despite these precautions, leaks and speculation continued. A single photo, a brief video clip, or even a misinterpreted expression could generate headlines, amplify public debate, and unsettle the children. The tension extended to interactions with other family members. Visits, calls, and communications that might have been routine were now laden with emotional weight. The children, sensitive to shifts in tone and expression, picked up on subtle cues, adding to their sense of confusion. How could they understand loyalty, love, and identity when those concepts were suddenly complicated by the public fallout of adult decisions? Experts emphasize that this type of public scrutiny can have long-lasting effects on children. Anxiety, heightened awareness of public perception, and even early social caution are common among children raised under intense media observation. For Harry and Meghan, this meant being hyper-aware of the emotional climate, managing their own responses while simultaneously guiding their children through an environment they could neither predict nor fully control. Yet even in the midst of uncertainty, there were moments of resilience and normalcy. Playtime, storytelling, and familial routines became acts of resistance, a way to shield Archie and Lilibet from the full force of the world's scrutiny. Meghan reportedly emphasized creativity, emotional expression, and open dialogue, encouraging the children to ask questions, voice concerns, and maintain a sense of agency over their own experiences. Harry reinforced these lessons through reassurance, affection, and modeling calm assertiveness. But the stakes were not only emotional, they were legal and symbolic. Losing royal titles meant losing privileges, protections, and a specific social status that had been automatically granted by birthright. Questions arose about school interactions, international travel, and even public representation. Every decision carried dual significance, protecting the children in the present while safeguarding their identity and opportunities for the future. As the days unfolded, the tension only escalated. Reports emerged of public debate, speculative articles, and viral social media content questioning the family's every move. Friends and advisors warned that public perception could influence not only the monarchy's standing but also the children's social environment, relationships, and self-esteem. Every outing, every appearance, every photograph became a potential catalyst for controversy. In response, Meghan intensified her strategic approach. Beyond managing appearances and communications, she focused on cultivating a sense of stability within the family. Carefully curated activities, private educational initiatives, and controlled exposure to the public were designed to create a protective buffer. Even small gestures, a familiar bedtime routine, consistent family meals, or playful interactions, were carefully leveraged to reinforce the children's sense of security amid chaos. Yet despite these efforts, a looming question remained. How could they truly shield Archie and Lilibet from the world when every detail, every emotion, every moment was being watched, analyzed, and judged? The pressure of maintaining emotional equilibrium while navigating public scrutiny created a delicate balance that could shift at any moment. And then, just as the family began to adjust to this fragile stability, a new development emerged. A photograph, shared anonymously on social media, appeared to show the children in a private moment, unaware of the storm surrounding them. The image was instantly dissected, speculated upon, and sensationalized. Public commentary poured in, some sympathetic, some critical, and some outright speculative. The carefully constructed protective measures were suddenly at risk of unraveling. This single image, seemingly innocuous, became a catalyst for renewed scrutiny. The children, at the center of a global narrative they could not yet comprehend, were now under a spotlight that threatened both their privacy and emotional well-being. The stakes had escalated, and Harry and Meghan realized that their approach, no matter how careful, would have to evolve rapidly. When the news broke, the world didn't just react. It exploded. Within minutes, every major news outlet had mobilized teams, analysts, and correspondents, each trying to process, explain, and interpret the unprecedented announcement. Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet had been stripped of their royal titles. The reaction was instantaneous, unrelenting, and chaotic. Social media platforms erupted with speculation, outrage, and support, forming an endless cycle of commentary that fed itself with every new rumor or image. How do you respond when the public opinion engine is running at full throttle, and every word, glance, or gesture is scrutinized as evidence of guilt, defiance, or submission? In London, newsroom editors scrambled to confirm facts. Headlines were rewritten multiple times in the first hour alone. Some emphasized the scandal, some the personal tragedy, and others framed it as a historic, unprecedented move by King Charles. Pundits debated the ethics, legality, and implications of the decision. Was it a protective measure, a disciplinary action, or a power play? Every interpretation fueled the frenzy, and the palace watched helplessly as the narrative grew beyond their control. Meanwhile, on social media, reactions were a whirlwind of emotion. Memes, viral posts, and hashtag campaigns popped up almost immediately. Some users expressed outrage at the stripping of titles, framing it as cruel and excessive. Others defended the king, citing duty, tradition, and the preservation of the monarchy's image. Some posts were humorous, mocking, or satirical, capturing the absurdity of a global audience suddenly obsessed with every detail of a family's private life. The volume of engagement was staggering, a relentless tide that only amplified the pressure on Harry, Meghan, and the palace staff. Public opinion was deeply divided. Polls suggested a sharp split. Some saw the decision as a necessary reinforcement of royal authority, while others perceived it as an unfair punishment of individuals trying to carve their own path. The debates were relentless and personal, with former royal experts, celebrities, and political figures weighing in. Every angle seemed to spark further conversation, pushing the story higher into public consciousness. For Harry and Meghan, the media frenzy was both a challenge and a battleground. Every decision, from communications to public appearances, now carried heightened consequences. An offhand comment, a seemingly minor expression, or an unplanned photo could be amplified into a global debate. Their advisors worked tirelessly, preparing statements, analyzing trends, and anticipating reactions. Every message had to be calibrated to maintain composure, protect the children, and assert control without inflaming tensions further. Behind the scenes, the palace staff struggled to maintain order. Communications teams worked around the clock to manage leaks, monitor public sentiment, and coordinate responses. Every misstep risked escalating the crisis. Every delay could be seized upon by media outlets eager for sensational content. Staff members reported unprecedented levels of pressure, balancing loyalty to the family with the demands of global scrutiny. Conversations in the corridors, once routine and ceremonial, were now tinged with urgency and apprehension. Complicating matters further was the international dimension. News of the decision spread rapidly beyond the United Kingdom, prompting commentary from political analysts, foreign media, and global audiences. Diplomatic observers weighed the implications for the monarchy's international image, considering how such a dramatic familial rupture could influence public perception, foreign relations, and cultural authority. The ripple effect was instantaneous and far-reaching, underscoring the global stakes of what was initially a domestic family decision. Even within the family, reactions were complex. Some members reportedly supported the king's decision, emphasizing duty and tradition. Others were critical, seeing it as unnecessarily punitive and damaging to familial relationships. Every private conversation carried weight, with aides mediating between personal loyalties and the broader needs of the institution. Internal dynamics were strained, with the public reaction adding a layer of tension that could not be ignored. Amid this frenzy, a series of leaks began to surface. Anonymous messages, partial photographs, and unverified accounts appeared online, each one sparking new waves of speculation. Media outlets competed to report these fragments, often without confirmation, further fueling public curiosity and outrage. Harry and Meghan's team worked tirelessly to assess authenticity, craft responses, and anticipate the next wave of exposure. The pace was relentless, the stakes higher with each passing hour. Psychologists and media experts weighed in publicly, highlighting the emotional toll such scrutiny could take on individuals and families. They emphasized that children, especially, could be vulnerable to both direct and indirect impacts. Anxiety, stress, and identity confusion could emerge, compounded by constant public discussion of their status. The advice was clear: limit exposure, maintain consistent routines, and provide emotional reassurance. But executing such guidance in real time under global scrutiny proved incredibly challenging. In this environment, small actions became magnified. A single interview snippet, a photograph of a private moment, or even a facial expression could trigger global debate. Every engagement was dissected, every public statement measured for tone, intent, and implication. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that the media's attention could pivot at any moment, shifting from the narrative of lost titles to deeper controversies, whether real or fabricated. The family also faced unexpected challenges from social media influencers, viral content creators, and amateur commentators. Clips, memes, and posts circulated rapidly, often blending fact with speculation. These narratives could gain momentum independently of verified information, creating new layers of pressure for the family. It was a modern, digital storm, one that blended information, entertainment, and public opinion in ways unprecedented in royal history. And yet, despite the constant barrage, there were glimmers of strategy. Meghan and Harry coordinated carefully to maintain messaging control, ensuring that statements, appearances, and communications were carefully crafted to balance personal emotion with public image. Their approach reflected an understanding that in today's media landscape, perception often outweighs reality. Maintaining a sense of calm, composure, and calculated action became as critical as any legal or procedural maneuver. The public's reaction also revealed unexpected contradictions. Some criticized Harry and Meghan as entitled or manipulative, while others praised them as courageous and independent. Polls, comment sections, and talk shows oscillated between condemnation and support, reflecting the deep divisions in perception and expectation. Each wave of opinion added complexity to an already volatile situation, forcing the family to constantly reassess strategy and response. As the hours passed, the media frenzy showed no signs of abating. Headlines multiplied, social media engagement soared, and every minor development became a story. Photographs, interviews, and statements were dissected repeatedly. Analysts speculated on the future, offering predictions ranging from reconciliation to permanent estrangement. Every day seemed to bring a new angle, a new twist, and a new layer of emotional and public complexity. Then, just as the palace and the family began to stabilize communication channels, a new shock emerged. A leaked recording, partially obscured and anonymous, appeared online, hinting at private conversations between members of the family regarding the children's status and the decisions that had led to the stripping of titles. The clip, short but potent, ignited another wave of speculation, controversy, and public debate. Analysts predicted that this leak could redefine the narrative entirely, creating new challenges for both the family and the monarchy. What if the real story wasn't in the headlines, the statements, or even the photographs, but in the words that were never meant to be seen? Behind palace doors, in locked drawers, and hidden correspondence, lay letters and messages that revealed a side of the royal family the public had never imagined. Some of these communications were private notes between King Charles and advisors. Others were letters between Harry and his father, and even between Meghan and confidants, discussing delicate strategies, grievances, and betrayals. Now, in the wake of titles being stripped, those once private words began to leak, and they had the power to rewrite the narrative entirely. The first revelations arrived quietly. A trusted aide reported discovering letters that suggested long-standing disagreements, miscommunications, and misaligned expectations had been simmering for years, far beyond what the public had ever seen. These documents contained candid, unfiltered assessments, exposing frustrations, doubts, and tensions that had been carefully managed or hidden until now. Lines that were once private reflections became explosive when interpreted in the harsh light of public scrutiny. The emotional stakes of these messages were immediate. They confirmed that the fissures leading to the loss of titles were far deeper and more personal than the initial announcement suggested. Among the most provocative disclosures were letters exchanged between Harry and his father. Some depicted deep hurt and frustration from Harry, expressing that his identity and individuality felt constrained within the royal system. Others conveyed attempts at reconciliation, apologies, and a desire for mutual understanding. The contradictions were striking. A mix of anger and love, resentment and yearning for connection. Observers noted that the tone of these letters highlighted the complex human dimension often overshadowed by public spectacle, the personal pain that accompanies formal protocol and ceremonial duties. Meanwhile, Meghan's correspondence revealed a different layer of strategy and foresight. She was meticulous in documenting interactions, conversations, and perceived slights. Some letters included instructions for allies, proposed legal or media strategies, and careful observations about timing, optics, and narrative management. These messages painted a picture of a woman navigating a system not designed for her, balancing personal and familial loyalty with calculated measures to protect herself, Harry, and the children. But these letters did more than just reveal intent. They exposed vulnerabilities. Confidential notes suggested that some palace staff were caught between loyalty to the king and empathy for Harry and Meghan. Others revealed tensions within the extended family, with conflicting advice and opinions about how to manage both the fallout and the ongoing narrative. Every letter, every email, and every note created layers of complexity that made the situation more unpredictable. The leaks themselves became a story. Some appeared anonymously online. Fragments of private correspondence circulated in forums and social media, often accompanied by speculation about authenticity. Every leak intensified the public reaction, fueling debates and reinforcing the perception that the crisis was far from contained. Journalists scrambled to verify details, while analysts dissected wording, tone, and potential implications. Even minor phrases were interpreted as evidence of betrayal, manipulation, or deeper conspiracies. One particularly explosive message appeared to suggest that key decisions regarding the children's roles in public appearances had been contested, debated, and even challenged by advisors behind the scenes. The correspondence implied that Harry and Meghan's involvement had been questioned, and that disagreements over protocol, privacy, and public exposure may have influenced the king's decision. These revelations reframed the story. What had initially appeared to be a unilateral royal action was now understood as a culmination of long-standing conflict, negotiation, and tension. Further complicating matters, some letters hinted at external influences, political figures, media strategists, and international contacts who had been consulted in confidence. These communications, while cryptic, suggested that the family's private decisions were being shaped, at least in part, by factors beyond the palace walls. Observers noted that this added a new dimension to the crisis. Decisions were not only internal, but also influenced by perception, advice, and potential leverage from outsiders. Among the most dramatic revelations were notes that hinted at miscommunications and misinterpretations. One aide reportedly explained that a single phrase, misread or poorly timed, had escalated tensions in ways no one had anticipated. The letters revealed how fragile relationships had become under the pressure of public scrutiny, with small misunderstandings magnified into crises that now seemed monumental. Harry and Meghan's team had to react quickly. Each leak required assessment. Authenticity had to be confirmed, messaging adapted, and potential fallout mitigated. Some messages were used strategically to frame the family's perspective, while others were treated as threats, requiring urgent damage control. The dynamic was intense. Every word could influence perception, every interpretation could ignite further debate, and every leak risked exacerbating the public frenzy. Despite the chaos, these letters offered insights into the emotional dimension of the family's experience. Pain, frustration, love, and concern for the children were woven into every message. Observers emphasized that while public narratives often framed the family as divisive or controversial, the correspondence revealed the human reality. A family grappling with profound loss, public scrutiny, and the challenge of maintaining unity amidst unprecedented pressure. Yet the story was far from over. New leaks continued to surface, each more revealing than the last. Analysts noted that the timing of these disclosures suggested a coordinated effort, possibly by individuals with deep knowledge of the palace's inner workings. The letters hinted at undisclosed meetings, private discussions, and confidential advice that had influenced the king's decision. Observers speculated that more explosive details could surface at any moment, capable of altering public perception dramatically. In this environment, Harry and Meghan faced a delicate balancing act. They had to manage their own emotional responses, protect their children, and anticipate further leaks, all while maintaining a strategic posture in public communications. Each decision carried immense weight. Every choice could either defuse or escalate tensions, and the awareness that private words had become public ammunition added a layer of intensity that made even routine decisions fraught with risk. What made these revelations particularly compelling was the contrast between intent and perception. Letters that were intended as private reflections were interpreted as public confessions. Messages meant to clarify strategy were construed as evidence of conspiracy. Every nuance mattered, and every leak had the potential to redefine the story. This interplay between secrecy, revelation, and interpretation created a volatile narrative landscape, one in which Harry and Meghan had to navigate with extraordinary care. Then, just as the family seemed to stabilize amidst the initial leaks, a particularly sensitive communication emerged, a note suggesting that one member of the inner circle may have intentionally leaked information to shape public perception. The implications were staggering. It hinted at betrayal from within, complicating an already precarious situation, and raising questions about loyalty, motive, and the possibility of further surprises. And in that moment, one undeniable truth became clear. The letters and messages were not just records of private thoughts. They were instruments of power, influence, and emotional leverage. They had the potential to reshape the narrative entirely, to challenge assumptions, and to expose vulnerabilities no one could have anticipated. When the titles were stripped, the impact went far beyond ceremony and public perception. It struck at the heart of wealth, inheritance, and legal privileges. Suddenly, Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet were no longer shielded by the protections and entitlements that came with royal status. For the first time, the family was confronted with a financial and legal landscape that demanded immediate attention, strategic foresight, and careful maneuvering. What exactly do you lose when your royal titles vanish? And how do you navigate a world where every asset, every trust fund, and every legal privilege is suddenly in question? The immediate concern for Harry and Meghan was not just income, but security. Royal titles are accompanied by extensive protections, legal immunities, security details, and formal privileges. With the loss of these titles, the family faced new vulnerabilities. Security advisors reportedly had to reassess travel protocols, daily routines, and private engagements to ensure safety while minimizing exposure. Legal counsel was called in to evaluate both immediate and long-term consequences, scrutinizing documents, financial agreements, and obligations that had previously been protected under royal prerogative. But the financial stakes ran even deeper. Trust funds, inheritance rights, and public grants that had been guaranteed to Harry and Meghan were now subject to interpretation and legal review. Some advisors suggested that large portions of previously secure funds could be frozen or redirected, depending on the exact legal wording of their agreements. Experts in royal finance warned